Cool, and we're live. Welcome everyone who's joining us on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. We'll be starting in just a moment, so hang tight.
And then while we're waiting for a couple more people to start joining us, we just want to welcome everybody who's tuning in right now to Zoom chats. Today we are wrapping up this week. So today and tomorrow we're featuring two creatives. So today will be Michael from Solidarity of Unbridled Labor. He's joining us from Burlington, Vermont. And then tomorrow we're going to be featuring a design and architecture studio based out of Monterrey, Mexico. So that will wrap up this week of Zoom chat. So today and tomorrow, definitely tune in. And just want to welcome everyone who is joining us. Please know that Zoom Chats is a free weekly live stream that we at AIG Detroit host. We're doing these through the end of June, hoping to continue them sometime soon. But for the spring, kind of early summer session, we're wrapping this up end of June. So we have about another 2 weeks left. So definitely take a look at our schedule that we're posting on our Facebook and Instagram pages. Feel free to log in at our website, detroit.aig.org, and feel free to follow us and different programs that we're hosting in addition to Zoom chats. And I just want to welcome everyone who is tuning in. Feel free to use the chat section. Let us know where you're tuning in from, whether it's here in the Midwest, whether it's from Brazil, or you're tuning in from Singapore, Indonesia, wherever you're tuning in around the world. We just want to welcome you. Feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from. And we're going to get started here in just a few minutes. I want to go ahead and introduce Michael, who is the founder and creative director at Solidarity of Unbridled Labor, based out of Burlington, Vermont. Really great design studio, doing some smart thinking projects. It's a collaborative space. I think I forgot the name of the warehouse that you're working out of, that it's this collective of creatives, of startups. There's a really awesome little coffee shop on site, gallery space. There's a screen printing studio. So doing some amazing things out of Burlington. So Michael, I don't want to overstep your introduction. So feel free to take it from here. And we want to welcome you at AIG Detroit. Super excited to have you for today's Zoom chat series.
Wow. Thank you very much for the welcome and the introduction. That was very, very kind. And thank you, AIGA Detroit, Dylan and Maria. It's really appreciated. And I think what you guys put in motion, and as I was mentioning earlier, you responded really quickly to bring the creative community together in, I think, a really good way. I think the multidiscipline sort of mixing that you've done on some of the stories that have been told has been really wonderful. So it's an honor to be here. Thanks everybody out there for making the time to come and listen to this, and hopefully we can engage and look forward to some great questions and dialogue, because that's what it's all about. But I've been thinking about this for a bit. I mean, it's been a hell of a year so far, I think, for everybody. And it continues to be something that really stretches your head as to what will come next. And I've been kind of examining, thinking a lot about design's role in this, and what we do as communicators has affected some of what this presentation is about. And hopefully you will find it helpful or interesting on some level. But I think at this point, we'll begin to drop in. I'll give you a little bit more context, and then we'll actually get into a specific presentation. And then there's a little bonus track at the end that we'll see what you think about. So why don't we go ahead and start to move over to the presentation.
Sounds good.
All right. So just for context, Solidarity of Unbridled Labor is strategic brand design is really what we do. We try to do intelligently informed design that actually gets good things done in the world. Our whole mission and desire is to advance design's ability to really move better ideas into the world in successful ways. We work all over the globe in a number of different categories. I was actually part and a founder of an idea that existed before this, which was JDK Design, which I worked on with many, many very talented people and collaborated with so many incredible people for about 25 years before Solidarity of Unbridled Labor. And then Solidarity was created about 7 years ago. And I'm one of the co-founders of Solidarity. And we created a practice that is really about strategic brand design, but at a very deep and passionate, empathetically based, driven way of working. Our relationships are very diverse in the categories we work in, and we get to work with a lot of really amazing people. So we're extremely fortunate and appreciative of all of the people we get to connect with. Our name kind of says it all. A lot of people sometimes, think it's a bit of an odd name. In our minds, it's not odd in the least, in the sense that it's kind of wearing on your shirt sleeve what you believe. So solidarity of intention. If you don't have that, specifically in multidiscipline design, if you don't have solidarity of intention as to what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it and why it matters, you're kind of flawed in your thinking from the beginning, at least from our experience. Unbridledness, obviously, is a comment on differentiation and being willing to sort of unhook from conventional thought and trying to really do things that are communicating in unique and different ways. And the labor part of it, we actually think about we use the European spelling of labor with the hour embedded because it never ceases to amaze me, the awe of what it actually takes to get a collective of energy to come together and get disciplines to mix in a synchronized way to actually get an idea into the world that works and is effective and is beautiful and powerful. It really is an hour type of labor. And I think that's always guided our work. I've always been incredibly committed to the idea of collaboration. I actually, a little quick side note, I kind of don't really like the word collaborative anymore, or collaboration. I think it's become tainted, and there's all kinds of books out there about collaboration, but I think what they've come down to is they sound like how to play nicely together. It's sort of instructions on not being troublemakers or difficult or insulting. And that's nice. It's good to certainly be a nice human being and be respectful. But I think the idea of what people lost is that collaboration is actually about a transcendent idea. It's about third-mindedness and the ability to really find ideas that are the intersection of multiple people coming together. That's what I think we should be calling what we do together, is third mind work or third-mindedness versus collaboration, because collaborations become this sort of hollow, let's be reasonable together. So anyway, a little bit of a side note, but something to think about when you think about solidarity of intention. That's a big part of it. So moving forward, the other thing that we think about is relationship and behavior. So the blocks that you're looking at here, this is part of our identity. They were probably, a lot of you are like, Josef Albers, interaction of color, and that is the correct answer. These are a metaphorical reference for relationship and what design's job is and what it is that we're a part of together, but it is based on the inspiration of Josef Albers' interaction of color and the work that he did at the Black Mountain College and post-Bauhaus. But obviously his theories are about one color next to another. They affect each other and they change each other. And that's, a very fundamental part of what he did. But what we always found interesting about this was that those images and that idea, that metaphor, is powerful because it reminds you that your audience, if you are in shared purpose with your audience and the design you're doing, your audience is changing you and you are changing the audience. And often too many I think often some designers and also the design industry we're in, but also a lot of the brands that are out there communicating, they often forget that the best place to be is to be one with your audience versus just creating something and sending it out to an audience. And I think as the world moves forward, more and more we're learning, and certainly from our experience, the more that boundary is blurred, that you are one with your audience, the more effective you will be. But it also means you have to take responsibility that they're changing you and you're changing them. So that's why this becomes sort of a guiding metaphor for the work that we do. So this image, it probably was like, oh, this is some sort of weird, desperate ploy to be odd. It honestly isn't. It actually, you'll see in a moment, it's kind of an homage to Detroit itself. I absolutely love Detroit. I've spent a fair amount of time there. I have a lot of friends who are out there and doing incredible work there. And it's an important city and an important place that has affected culture for decades and decades and decades. And on many, many different levels, whether that is technology, obviously the auto industry and mobility and the future of mobility, but music, of course. And that's what this reference is about. So I did this sort of as a Detroit homage. And it was, I guess it was my best Iggy Pop kind of gig. So James Osterberg is from Michigan. So he was born in Michigan, and certainly a lot of the Stooges and their early work in the art of punk rock happened in Detroit. And this is from the cover of the Iggy Pop album Soldier. It was from 1979. And an interesting piece of history, a lot of people actually, there was theories out there that stage diving was sort of created at a Rolling Stones concert, which I kind of could imagine that maybe happening, but I think it's completely untrue. I think the reality is that Detroit, Iggy Pop, Godfather of Punk, that's where it happened. And stage diving actually happened in Detroit at early shows. So anyway, I'm a big Iggy fan, and because of the conviction of what he has designed his life to be. Anyway, so that image was kind of my homage to Detroit and to Iggy. All right, so this is kind of the doorway to the presentation and what I am really interested in having a conversation about. So a couple of things just to dissect this. So the Dyslexic Farmer, Fearless Curiosity, Baggism, and 20 Solid Reasons to Design Responsibly. There's a few layers to this, and you'll see how this becomes relevant as we go forward. The first, of course, so the Dyslexic Farmer is me. I actually grew up on a farm about 40 minutes north of where I'm standing here in a town called St. Albans, Vermont. I was about 15 minutes from the Canadian border. It's actually about an hour and a half from Montreal, and I went to design school in Montreal ultimately as well. But the Dyslexic Farmer part of it is, I realized, though they didn't know then, back when I was a child, that what dyslexic actually even was, but I certainly knew that I couldn't read very well and I couldn't spell very well, and math was certainly no friend of mine. And I stumbled my way through, but I did discover that I had some ability to draw, and I could paint, and I had ideas, and I thought a lot about images. And thankfully I had a mother and an art teacher or two along the way that recognized that, and somehow design found me and I found design. Ultimately, it was through art. I mean, I wanted to do album covers. I lived on this farm, but I lived through album covers and music and the images on album covers. And that was what led me to what ultimately became design and creative direction and so on. And that's a story for another time. I'll maybe share another presentation at some point with all of you about the story of the design path that I took. But so I ended up becoming a designer because of this sort of dyslexic farmerness struggle. And then that gave me a sense of learning that was really about imagery and images and the power of images, because I have kind of like a hypercard that runs through my mind of images that we'll get into a little further. Fearless curiosity is something that I've always been very intrigued by. I think the people that are questioners are the most sort of important people in the world in a sense, because they move things forward and they fearlessly question convention and norms, and not everyone is cut out to do that, but it's one of the greatest talents you can have, to be curious of yourself and your surroundings and context, because that's what drives change. And I had an experience with my son Eli and I about, it was probably 20 years ago. We went to a presentation of Spalding Gray. And I don't know how many of you know of Spalding Gray, or maybe some of you had the fortunate opportunity to see him present. He sadly has passed. He died about 10 years ago, I believe. But he would give monologues. He would do presentations. He wrote a lot of essays, but he would go out and he would do monologues. That was kind of his art form. We went to see him at a place called the Flynn Theater right here in Burlington, Vermont. It houses about 2,000, maybe 2,500 people. And I remember dragging my son to this. We're going to go see this guy just talk for a few hours. And I somehow convinced him that this would be a good idea, though he had never heard of him or anything. But we got there. And what was happening was Spalding Gray was on a tour. And this tour was called Everyone is Interesting. And he would literally go, his only tools were that he had a desk, 2 chairs, and his glass of water. He went to the Flynn. 15 minutes before the show, he went out and talked to people in the lobby and just hung out and chatted and spoke to people in the lobby. 15 minutes later, he's on stage in front of a sold-out house, and he just calls out a name and invites somebody out of the audience that he just met to come down and sit on the stage with him and talk. And his whole tour was done that way. That night, he talked to 9 people. The first one was a 9-year-old girl from Milton, Vermont, a tiny little town. And he just had conversations. And his point was, every single person on this earth is interesting if you are interested. And he had people laughing, crying, shocked. The sharing of the stories that he was able to get people comfortable to reveal of themselves was incredible. But what it was this fearless curiosity that he could create the conditions for. And it was about being interested in who people really were and getting them to reveal that. So that's one lesson to think about: images and interest and curiosity. Baggism is a topic that's pretty interesting in that John and Yoko created this idea. So John Lennon and Yoko Ono in the 60s did bed-ins, hair-ins, and so on. And actually one of the most profound ones was in the Chateau Champlain hotel in Montreal in 1968, I think. And one of the things they practiced at that time was a thing called Baggism, which was an idea that John had developed. The concept behind that, he was very frustrated with his long hair at that point and crazy beard and sandals and the sort of freakish vibe that was going on in the 60s, and certainly what his lifestyle was about, was the frustration that people would make these judgments based on who they were looking at versus what they were sharing or saying, what the conversation was about. So he would literally do interviews under the blankets of the bed, and he wouldn't let people see he or Yoko. He would make them listen to what they were saying, which would then create images in their mind about peace or the future, or whatever the themes were that John and Yoko were trying to communicate. But it was, again, this idea of focus on what makes human beings interesting and understand that each of us is very different and very individual. And there's certain things embedded in us that frame our world, our point of view, our context uniquely. So whether it is my dyslexia triggering a need for hypercard-like imagery to help me find my way through the world and express ideas, or the curiosity of Spalding Gray being about interested in interesting combinations of pulling ideas out of people, or the Baggism idea of those reveals of, listen to the truth that people are saying and understand there's a specific context to that. So those things got me thinking about how could we tap into that? How could you actually see that as designers? What could you do as an exploration to understand like what is going on inside all these individual people? Like what is it that shapes their view? And that's what got me to this 20 solid reasons to that design has to be done responsibly. So what I'm going to present to you now is a PechaKucha presentation. Very likely many of you have seen PechaKucha presentations or done them yourselves. Or if you haven't, I'll give a little bit of context so you just understand what they are. But PechaKucha is, it means chit chat in Japanese. It's a presentation style that was created in Tokyo in 2003. It's now kind of an international phenomenon. There's chapters of it all over the world. It was created by Astrid Klein and Marco Dytham. And they were trying to create a format, they're architects, and they were working in Japan, and they were trying to create a format that was efficient and kept people on point in their communication, because architects have a reputation for sort of waxing on too far or too deep about their projects, was at least what their experience was. So they created this kind of contained format that is 20 images, 20 seconds each, which creates a 6-minute and 40-second presentation. So that's what we're going to do. I've altered the format somewhat, which you'll see. But it's a way to look at this idea. So what I've attempted to do is I'm going to share with you 20 images that frame my worldview and have an effect on me that sort of come through my mind as almost hypercard-like imagery. And I tried to do this in an absolutely unvarnished truth way of what's really there. And then we'll talk about our project coming up after this. So let's drop in. So this is my first memory, the crotch of this tree. 3 years old, I had a pair of cowboy boots on, and I was trying to climb this tree, and I got my cowboy boots stuck in the crotch of this tree, and I could not get it out. And this memory is so embedded because I thought I was trapped there forever. I watched a lot of film with my mother. This image is from a film called The Robe. And this is the beginning, I guess, of my fear of God marketing really begins here. So this is the crucifixion scene in this film. This actor's name happens to be Dean Jager, by the way, which is kind of ironic. That Strike of Thunder from Daft Punk was perfectly timed. So this is an album cover, Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby. Pretty scary that this was in our house when I was like 8 years old. But I always remember this because I drew these cartoons. I tried to be drawing these, and it's based on Song of the South film, and but it's like propaganda from the South, which is scary. The image of Marilyn Monroe, Lauren Schiller. This was on the set of Something's Gotta Give, the last film that she was going to make before she died. She actually died a few months after this. But as a young man, this was a pretty memorable image, as was this. Jacqueline Onassis, JFK's assassination. This was a moment that time stood still. November 22nd, 1963, 12:20 Central Time. I remember so clearly this image and seeing it over and over and over and over. Another shaping moment, Star Trek. William Shatner and Sabrina Sharp playing in this an episode called The Paradise Syndrome of Star Trek in '68. I'm certain that my relationship with women with long dark hair was absolutely defined by that episode. Easy Rider. This is Peter Fonda. He became effectively the counterculture Captain America. Easy Rider was a film I've watched over and over. Dennis Hopper's directorial, super incredible piece of art, 1969 in New Orleans. But it really had an effect on your perception of America. I remember seeing this image with my family at dinner, hitting on the news. Nguyen Ngoc Loan is the executioner. He was a general in the South Vietnamese army and a police chief. And Nguyen Van Lem is the Viet Cong fighter who was 36, who was executed live. I've never seen anything like that in my life, and it changed me. Yoko Ono and John, this is an image John made, actually, a self-timed shot. This is the Two Virgins album cover. And it's from 1968. It was the first post-Beatles release. Again, memorable, as is this. Human beings on the damn moon. It's Buzz Aldrin is in the photo, and Neil Armstrong shot it in 1969. I've painted, drawn, looked at this image over and over, and the wonder and awe of it. The hyperrealism is important, as an artist and a designer making art. I did a lot of illustration, this realism, but again, it's another installment in the fear of God marketing continued. This is the crucifixion painting by Salvador Dali called Corpus Hypercubus. This is the first painting that made me cry. It's a Robert Motherwell painting. It was inspired by the atrocities of the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War. It's actually called Elegy to the Spanish Republic 70. It was done in 1961. He committed 40 years of his life to doing this series of paintings. This is one of the most mind-stretching things I've ever seen is Joseph Beuys. This is an image from a performance art piece, but it really changed my view of what art could be. It's called How to Explain Pictures to a Dead Hair. It was done in 1965. Iconic Robert Mapplethorpe, Patti Smith, Punk, Beauty, Androgyny, the Horses album cover in 1975. This was so counterintuitive to every other album that came out at that point that was just doing more insane art after another, that it just cut to the bone with its power, as did that album. Another album cover, Yoko Ono's photograph. If you could imagine making this image, this was 6 months after John was shot to death right outside the Dakota. And this is an image that she shot for the first musical release she did 6 months later. And it's one of the most powerful photographs I think ever created. What matters and what defines success? This is actually a scene from a film, but I've got this embedded in me as Joe Strummer with Ray Grange, who was the director of Rude Boy, and Joe Strummer talking about what matters in life and what really defines success. If you haven't seen it, you need to hear what he has to say there. This is a photograph I did of my mother's hand. I shot this about 6 months before she died. She died in 2006 at 69 years old. She spent 25,285 days on Earth. And that image, I can feel her hand when I see that. In the design world, this is a shot that is an ad, actually. We created a poster and an ad out of it, but I remember working on this and it changed the perception and it changed snowboarding forever. It's an image by Justin Hostenek and it's Jason Girardi is the rider that you see there. Alan Kurdi, 3 years old, drowned on the shore of the Mediterranean Sea. His family were Syrian refugees that were trying to migrate to Europe. And this young boy died on that beach. And it was an image that caught fire on social media and then was gone, which is a sad story. And a counterpoint to that, this is my son, Oliver, my daughter, Mia, in the background, and my son, the little head in the back is my son, Eli, who's sitting here with me now in the Algarve in Portugal in 2006. And that image of joy and freedom aloft is something that is just indelibly etched into my mind. So what I just did was walk you through, again, it's sort of like a hypercard stack of images that's always present with me as I think about what matters in the world. And I think it affects me on like color and form and texture and story and impact and drama and the yin and yang of what exists in the world as far as good and evil and the dynamic tension and relationship between them. When you look at those images, and the test in this is, can you actually be absolutely truthful about the images that are always there in you? You'll notice, and I'm sure a lot of you are like, God, where's the 9/11? Where are these other moments? Obviously, many of them are also personal moments and seeing, people like Billy Bragg or, that had an effect. And one of the reasons I stopped short on some of these is there's things happening now in the world. There's a lot of images I'm sure that you're thinking of right now, and people and situations and moments that you're seeing images right now in your mind that would be in your stack. And that's why I kept it a little bit open-ended at the end of this, so that those would be your decisions to make. But it's an interesting examination to do 20 images and think sincerely about that. So what I'd like to do is share an idea with you. Is this concept of 20 solid reasons is designed to remind us as designers and creators and participants in the creative community that there's a responsibility to the images that we put out there, not only the images that we are affected by, but the images, of course, that we send out into the world. Remember the Joseph Albers painting and the call and response that exists? That exists in design. And the responsibility of the images that we make, that we send out, that we create, whether they be art, photography, video, all of the different ways that we can express imagery, we have to take the responsibility that they embed in people. And they embed in people at different times and in different ways. A young boy or girl or person in the world is affected at different times by different images, and it frames how they think, it frames how they see things. Not that some of those things can't be unlearned over time, but for us to underestimate how deeply they impact is naive. And design has an incredible responsibility. It also has an incredible opportunity. I think part of that responsible opportunity is to also think about images that create good and create good intention and good knowledge. And also sometimes that good knowledge comes at the price of something that's very hard to look at, like the Vietnam execution image. Very hard image to look at, even harder film to look at when you see what actually takes place in action. But it really had a profound impact on the value of life and how quickly a decision can be made to end one. So what I would like you to do is join us in design-wise and join into this idea of 20 solid reasons. We've set up an Instagram site, and it's basically here on the screen as you can see it. And you can just send me an email with what I hope will be, a study of your 20 images. So what I'm thinking would work best is if you each did a GIF that was 20 images, 3 seconds each, and that it would just cut to the next image. So it'd be 20 images, 3 seconds each, which would give each of you a 1-minute micro version of a Pechacucha. And then we'll post those. Certainly, if you want to put your name with it, that would be wonderful. If you want to share a comment or your feelings about the images, that would be great. That's your prerogative. But what I'm hoping is that you'll join me in this examination. And what we might find is if we can get enough of these up and you experience these 1-minute little stacks, it'll help remind us, each of us are different for a reason. We're embedded with different images and ideas and feelings, which make us unique and make us individual and help determine how we see the world. And it also helps you be empathetic to others because that same thing exists in them. And that's the Baggism thing. Listen closely, understand that stack is there. And remember Spalding Gray, like every single person is interesting. So when you talk to people, think about those defining moments, think about those images, think about those ideas, because they'll be different than yours very likely. There may be 1 or 2 that are the same, and they may have been interpreted differently. So those are things that hopefully would create a level of conversation and things that would be different. So those are the ramblings of a dyslexic farmer from St. Albans, Vermont, and what I've been thinking about. So I'd love to turn it back over to AIGA Detroit and Maria and Dylan if there's any questions that anybody has, or comments or thoughts, or if I've confused everyone incredibly. But I would love to just hear what people think, and answer any questions I can about anything.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. I know a lot of those images, like you even mentioned, some of them are not only impactful, but some of them are difficult to either look at or process. Sometimes knowing the depths of what humans are capable of. So it's really important, like you mentioned, that we as designers have that responsibility to create not just change, but to take responsibility for what we're putting out there. So really beautifully said and presented. And thank you very much for sharing those 20 images. Like Michael had mentioned, for those of you that are tuning in on Zoom, on Facebook, on our Twitter page, or on YouTube, please know that you can go ahead and submit and compile those 20 images that have made a deep impact for each of you. Think about, what those 20 images are, and feel free to go ahead and, email Michael and follow the, it's on Instagram, correct?
Yep.
Yes, so follow them, and I'm going to type this here in chat. It's called At 20 Solid Reasons. Let me just share that real quick. So feel free to, tag what you upload to Instagram, or feel free to email it directly, that animated GIF, like Michael mentioned, 3 seconds each with each of the images. And if you want to add a description or some kind of commentary to give some context, similar to how Michael described what those images, the significance behind those images and what they meant to each of you. So love the fact that this is an interactive Zoom chat. Michael, thank you very much for putting this together.
I'm excited to see what people create.
I'm excited.
Looking at this image, I was going to say I wanted to give a little shout out. This work that I've been marching around in front of. This is Cody Hudson from Chicago.
Nice.
We worked together for many years. These are screen prints, but his platform is called Struggle Inc. If you want to check out his artwork. But Cody's a phenomenal person and just incredible artist. But I thought I should probably give a shout out to what that art behind me is.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Yeah, I posted also just the name of it if people want to check out Cody's work. So Struggle Inc.
Yep.
Check that out. And then for those of you that are here in Zoom, there is a Q&A button where if you have questions for Michael, either related to his studio, related to these 20 solid reasons, related to anything that he had mentioned, or maybe questions that you have for him, feel free to type those questions out in the Q&A button. So again, in Zoom, in your dashboard, it's the bottom part of the dashboard. There's a Q&A button. Feel free to type out questions there. And for those of you that are tuning in through our other social media platforms, feel free to leave your questions in the comments section, and we'll make sure to get that over to Michael here in Zoom to make sure your questions are addressed. So while people are thinking of questions to type up, Michael, could you talk maybe a little bit about not just the responsibility, but how, and I shouldn't say not just, but with the responsibility that we as designers have, how does Solidarity of Unbridled Labor approach, a project, or maybe even something with your own initiatives? Because I know in addition to the design studio, you have all these other arms and some amazing things that you guys are doing. I mean, creating the on-site print collective, and you have another couple organizations and businesses that are all part of this family. If maybe you want to talk a little bit maybe about that, and maybe how you approach a project.
Great. Yeah, I could give a little more context to what we've created here. So Solidarity is the strategic brand design group. We're about 15 people, multidiscipline. We have strategy, writing, design, illustration, project management, account, experiential design. So and we all sit at this giant table called the Mega Desk. And that's in a building which is called the Karma Birdhouse. And it's a building that we've owned for 26 years now. It's a 45,000 square foot building on the waterfront in Burlington, right near Lake Champlain, is about 200 yards from here. And in that, Karma Birdhouse it's kind of a hybrid co-working space. There's about 50 different businesses in it. It's kind of a creative hub in that we have, virtual reality-based designers, web designers, digital writer, filmmakers, editors. There's a few therapists here that help us out now and again as well. We have a cafe and a gallery upstairs that we opened from when we first got the building, and we rotate shows through the gallery every 6 weeks to 2 months, designed to, show the work of people that are here, but also to just inspire people and engage people in different experiences. We have a thing called the Head Stretcher Society, which is designed to be an interaction where it isn't just people presenting to you. People present a context, an idea in the first 10 minutes. And then after that, it's basically 40 minutes of doing something, whether you're diving into life drawing or making a piece of art or creating some experimental digital piece. But the whole concept is to actually do something together and make something together. We haven't been able to do that recently because of the issues around gathering, but it's something that will return, but it's called the Head Stretcher Society. That was inspired by Oliver Wendell Holmes, who did the idea of a head stretched by a new idea can never return to its original form, which I always loved. So that's part of what Karma Birdhouse is. And then about 15 years ago, we created the Iskra Print Collective. It's a nonprofit silkscreen studio. We do a lot of work in the music industry with hundreds and hundreds of bands and other, working with nonprofits and others to help on event communication and things. We do 4 classes a year that teach people the entire silkscreen process. So they come in and they have a process of learning the production methods and how the studio runs, and then they can make their own art, and then they're a part of a show in the gallery where they can sell their art and so on. We do projects like with Patagonia will work with us to do skill sharing, and we'll teach people how to be more effective in activism using design, and that's where Iskra Print Collective gets involved as an example. So that's kind of what our culture is about here. The other thing, to give context, as you mentioned, Maria, on what happens here, we also have incubated a number of our own ideas and our own brands. We have created a bike company, a toy idea, a number of different things in different categories. One of them that you'll all be likely familiar with is Mamava. When you're in an airport and you see a lactation suite, or the places where mobile moms can breastfeed or pump, those pods are an idea that was incubated here about 8 years ago. And Mamava now is a very successful company and a women's own culture that was started by 2 people that worked in strategy account with me for about 20 years, Sasha Mayer and Christine Dotson. And they are now the directors of Mamava, but I think they have like 40 employees, and we're nearly in every state with the units, and there's a digital platform that's just incredible. But it's really about advancing the cultural need for every mother everywhere to be able to have access for clean, safe space to breastfeed and to practice the important role of that in family and life. So that's an example of the kind of thing that happens. As far as process, with Solidarity, that's how we practice. We work together to determine what projects we do or don't do. We have a certain framing and protocol that we use to determine who we will work with and why, and what do we help do or not. We are very committed to only helping good ideas happen in the world. That doesn't mean that we only work with nonprofits or anything. We do work with people like, Patagonia and others that are doing important work, but also just are good, important businesses that are out there. So that's a lot of where our heart lies. We work from startups, and we'll spark things from the beginning, and we work with very large corporations as well. We work with a company in Norway called Yara. That's one of the largest agriculture companies in the world. They're really advancing digital farming in a beautifully and powerfully large scale way. And we're working with them right now and with IBM to develop ideas in that space. So it can be, they have more than 20,000 employees. So one day we're working with a group like that, which we do every day of every week. And then there's others that are 2 people starting a new virtual reality company. So it's a diverse range, which is exactly how we are interested in working. We're in the food space, in the fashion space, music, technology, the arts. Diversity is very important because it allows you to be empathetic in your work. It's kind of the fabric of life is made up of all those parts. So we're careful to make sure our process embraces diversity in everything we do. So hopefully that helps give a little more context. I don't know if any questions have arisen.
Yes, we got one from Michael Cotton here that asks, could you quickly talk about a project you've worked on where the concept of socially responsible design played a critical role?
Let's see. Yeah, Tomra is another Norwegian company. They actually created the category of reverse vending machines, and which are the machines at the grocery store where you return your bottles and redemption centers and so on. They actually helped to create that category in Norway about 70 years ago, and it continues to grow. And they're one of the leading groups in that space and helping to advance the circular economy and to really help people understand how recycling can and needs to work going forward in a responsible way as far as the resources and the depleting resources that we're dealing with and trying to manage, both in the climate side of things and the impact that's happening there, but also just the depletion of our resources in the process. So we've worked with them for the last 10 years on a number of different things in strategy and design, identity and communication. But one of the things that we are working on now is a project in Buffalo, New York, that is a pilot project that is it's called the Clean Loop Recycling Center. And the approach that we're in process on is really about dealing with clear, simple communication that is accessible to all, to help invite everyone in, doing it in a very socially just way, dealing with literacy issues, dealing with image that can communicate on that level to help people understand what's happening, to invite everyone in, and doing it in a very open way, while at the same time, it's allowing people to access technology that has never really been present in recycling. I mean, it's allowing the reward for doing what's right for your community at every level. So it's one example of a long relationship that is guided by solidarity of intention to educate and do well for everyone at every level in a social justice context. And so that would be one recent example.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry about that, guys. I was telling Dylan that my Zoom crashed on me, so apologies for dipping out. There was a question here I think it was already addressed for the socially responsible.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's the second one here. You mentioned it said you mentioned your first memory. What's your last significant memory?
Yeah, very good question. Huh. It seems very, very obvious, but the image, of course, of George Floyd and that video image, and the fact that no one kicked that police officer off him. And I'm sure for a lot of us, I mean, that is going to be in your array. But I mean, I think I would be naive to say that is not burned into my memory, and probably the most recent and most impactful. And it's not to say that all the images have to be that dark. I just think the world presently is demanding that those be embedded and be faced. And that one I would say is it. I actually have been trying, when I've been coming in and riding my bike over to the studio in the mornings. I've been listening to a lot of Alan Watts. I don't know if you guys listen to or read Alan Watts or not, but he was an incredible philosopher. And there's a book out that is called Out of Your Mind, and it's based on a series of his talks and lectures. And it's an incredible audio book as well, if you want to actually hear him make these presentations. But he does an incredible job of helping you understand we are one with everything. And as a counterpoint to the George Floyd image, I've been trying to make myself look at nature more readily. Even though I live in this beautiful place, you can be numb to it. And I've been trying to have a counterpoint to that. I've actually been trying to look deeply at nature again. And Alan Watts has had a big effect on me in that he does an incredible job of helping you keep a balance of the dark, heavy image and ideas and things that exist in the world, those forces, and the counterbalance of the beauty and the good and what we're all part of. So I would say it's both those things, a flower and George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
I got a question too. So we talked a little bit today about like how we have to be like conscious of the design that we put out, and I think there's been a lot of discussion more recently what about like design and ethics and like the place that designers like need to think about themselves in the production of goods and services. I even have like even if you know Mike Montiero's like Ruined by Design, I got my nice little copy of it here too. Can you talk a little bit about like, what are the sort of things that a designer needs to think about with this? Because it's not every day that, you get to work with, you're not working with Raytheon every day, and you don't have such easy like ethical things to consider.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Actually, one of the things, because I wondered if a question would come up about like what would be an example of this, and just vulnerability wise, I'll tell you a mistake I made as a designer. I was fairly young at that point, I suppose. I was probably mid-20s, probably mid-20s. I was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years into my design career. And it was in the early days working with Burton snowboards. Of course, snowboarding's role is to be sort of the sand and the Vaseline of a lot of traditional sports and skiing, and very, creating friction is the idea. And we did a lot of really experimental design. We were doing a lot of experiments with imagery, with collision of imagery, and some fairly raw art along the way that was pretty experimental. And I remember this one image, there was a whole language in skateboarding and snowboarding and others about just killer attitude and killer instinct and all this stuff. And looking at iconographic images that were out in the world, and there was a lot of appropriation of things, like sampling in music was happening, so sampling in design was happening, biting something and putting it in another context, and that was an experiment that was going on in a bold way. And I remember there was a publication called Beach Happy out of California, and I put an image together that I thought would be so punk and so badass. And it was an image of Charles Manson's face, one of his iconic crazy faces. And instead of the cross he had tattooed, I put the Burton B13 at the replacing that tattoo, thinking, and the B13, 13, unlucky 13, the fact that the reason Hell's Angels have a 13 tattoo is because it's the 13th letter in the alphabet, and it means that you murdered somebody because the 13th letter is L. So there's like all this, numerology around the letter 13, which is the ambiguity of a B or a 13 and being 13 years old and all stuff. So anyway, I thought that was a really clever idea to run this ad with Manson with just the Burton logo or this 13 in the middle of his head. And it sure was badass. And it certainly, I guess, was theoretically a punk thing to do. But one of the things that happened, and I'm so glad it happened when it did and how it did, but Sharon Tate's family sent Jake Carpenter Burton a letter about that ad. And it wasn't a rant, but it was a very elegantly communicated comment on what an irresponsible thing that was to do. And we had created the conditions with Burton to be like free-form design, anything goes, get out there. And I absolutely crossed the line, and I was just too naive to think about what it meant. I just had gotten to a point where like, yeah, Charles Manson, that's that crazy weird thing that you'll see t-shirts of. Sure, let's run it. And I'm so glad that happened when I was young, and that the Tate family was responsible enough to reach out and say, this can't happen. You cannot celebrate the life of a murderer. And it really, I got to tell you, it changed my view of what design is and the responsibility we have. Mm-hmm. And even though it was 20 years ago, it's still, it changed me. It changed the way I see what we do. So that's why I would, it's not only what companies you help, but it's how you help them and how you use the power of design.
Mm. Thank you, Michael. There's a question here that somebody submitted in the Q&A. Puya has a question. Puya asks, as academic programs are engaging this unique realm of change at hand, what are a few important points you think is essential for educators to pass on and design students to take away from their design education?
Well, I suppose based on what we're talking about today is a healthy respect for the responsibility that design has. I think we certainly are all very fortunate, and I've been at this a long time. I've been designing for over 30 years, and certainly there has been respect for design in multiple forms and multiple disciplines for many decades, but it is one of the most powerful things in the world. And I think the design schools, and I actually have all of my children went to art schools and design schools. 2 of them have graduated, and I have one 19-year-old, Oliver, the little boy running on the beach, is now 19, and he's going to SCAD. He just completed his first year. And I think, yes, the schools, what you're hoping is you're going to get an education that creates a degree of value and that you can apply a practice that can help you find your way in the world and have a career, whatever that becomes in the future. But I I think the schools should definitely be spending time not only helping the kids understand there's jobs out there for you and we'll get you packaged with a great portfolio and all that, but understanding that the practice of what we do affects people's lives, and not just to sell them shit. It affects people's lives in profound ways. And it's fine to sell things. I'm not disparaging that. I do a lot of that. We do a lot of work to help brands succeed. But I think the schools need to put a degree of focus on helping the next generation of designers really take to heart the responsibility and the opportunity, like understanding what you can do with the power of design to educate and change behavior and affect behavior in positive ways. The other thing is that design now has the power to be, because it is so powerful, we are at the table. We're at the big table. And designers that understand that it's more than aesthetics, it's strategy, it's thoughtful, mindful, empathetically driven, insightful work that we do, the more impact we can have. And I can tell you in my career, it's gone. The reason I got into more strategic based thinking, and my whole life now is blurring the boundary between creativity and design and strategy, is because you can use design to change the course of massive enterprises. And you're at the table if you can understand more about how the world works, how design can engage with it, have a design practice and a process that is being interested in people, being one thing I will tell you, I'm sorry to be ranting here. One thing I would say the schools could do is teach the students to demand empathetic connection. If you are asked to design things where you're just given a brief and you go off and you start designing just based on that brief, and you haven't actually experienced the product or the service or the idea, or you haven't gone out and have been in the shoes of the audience that is going to be receiving this, you shouldn't design the project. And people, in the compression of time that's happened where it's like, well, we don't have time to do research, we don't have time to go out and do this or do that, just here's the brief, we just need you to go. The design industry needs to start saying, if we don't have time to get curious and get empathetic about what it is you're asking us to do, you don't understand what design is. And you're probably not a good design buyer, or potentially not a good design third mind collaborator. And I think the schools should start embedding that in design, in the next generation of designers. Fight for the opportunity to be curious and empathetic, no matter what the schedule. And you will do better work that matters. And I truly believe that. My experience for 30 years, if you defend that right to get access, to get insight before you start designing, it changes everything. But I think that is being collapsed, and time is being stolen away because of the process.
That's really
Hopefully
good
that'll help a
advice.
school or two.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. I think that's something that I know that definitely needs to be emphasized in the education systems, is that empathy, but also, like you mentioned, really emphasizing the fact that what we do, affects and changes patterns, behaviors, and systems, and making sure that we can just instill that in our students, that power that designers have to influence and make a change and a difference for the better. Something that, like you said, usually just the kind of surface level things get emphasized more. Where
Underestimate the importance of that. Yeah,
right.
absolutely right.
So thank you very much, Michael. I know we're just at time, so it's just over 1:30 right now in the afternoon here in Eastern Standard Time. I apologize for the troll that got in here, so not sure what happened, but thank you, Dylan, for taking care of that. And Michael, thank you very much for sharing this I don't know, kind of this insight, not only for yourself as a designer and what has shaped you in how you see things. And you said even your worldview and how you approach things, and really seeing that this relationship, building relationship, like you mentioned, I mean, and affecting change and having our own experiences in life, things that we have witnessed, things that we carry with us, those impactful things and impactful moments do have an effect on us and continue to have an effect on us. And we can always do something about how we either respond and make this world not just a better place, but how we can think about affecting a positive change for everybody.
It's definitely an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. And for those of you that are tuned in through either Zoom or social platforms, just a reminder, feel free to email Michael those 20 images, again, an animated GIF of 20 images that have impacted you. And also feel free, if you don't want to email it, feel free to tag 20 solid reasons. So feel free to go ahead and tag them in Instagram, leave some commentary or description, give some context behind the 20 images that you've included in your GIF. And Michael, again, thank you very much for being here, being part of this AIG Detroit Zoom chat session. And thank you for everyone who's tuned in. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
It's really an honor. Take care.
Okay,
Stay
thank
out
you.
there.
Thank you. You too, Michael.
Bye,